Hey, this is Dave from Monster Magnet, and you're listening to the Ratio Podcast.
You better listen to what Johnny Ray said. You better let them words sink into that head. The past should stay buried in dead. You better listen to what Johnny Ray said.
Hello and welcome to the Ratio Podcast. I am your host, Johnny Ray, and today we are honored to have the mighty Jackie, the Joke Man Martling, on the show today on the Ratio. So get ready for just one of the funnest chats we've had. I mean, Jackie knows everything. He's an absolute legend. He knows everyone, and he's got stories just you aren't going to believe. A real radio pioneer and a super cool guy at that. So we'll have the chat with Jackie coming up in just a second. I want to thank everybody for all the great response from the Kira episode. It really, just like with Dave, we are so thrilled to be back with you all and bringing you these chats with these cool artists and people. It's just overwhelming how cool and how receptive you have been. So I just wanted to say thank you. On the Ratio side of it, we have a promo coming out this week or next, I believe, before Halloween. So while you guys were enjoying your Sunday evening, we were finishing the final shot of this, and let me tell you, it came out really, really cool. A lot of great area Athens folk came out and filled the movie up with just greatness. And I can't wait for everybody to see it. And we will have that out to you soon on the Ratio Facebook or on the Ratio Instagram at Ratio Podcast. Well, without further ado, let's get to our talk with Jackie the Joke Man Martling. Hello, everybody. Today's a special day on the Ratio Podcast. We have comedian, actor, writer, radio pioneer, enthusiastic skinny dipper, loyal friend, and all-around badass Jackie Martling on the show. Jackie, the Joke Man, how the hell are you doing today?
I could not be better. I woke up. It's horrible out there. It's like 55 degrees and windy, but I went for my nice long swim like I always do, and then climbed back in bed and relaxed a little bit. And now I'm sitting here putzing around, pretending I got something to do. And then I just called into Ireland to, I don't know if you know, do you know who Donovan is?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Donovan's son-in-law has a podcast called The Sync Report that's all about getting music put into TV shows and movies. And I start his show off with filthy jokes, and they just love it over there. They go nuts. So he's trying to bring me to Ireland. So that I just hung up with him, and now I'm talking to you. That's my life.
That's excellent, man. You're living right. You know that? You know that, though.
Well, you just as well might have talked to me to on a day where I didn't do a goddamn thing. I just happened to, I hit the lottery today, that's all.
Oh, man, I hear it. Well, it's ironic you bring up music because that's like where I'd like to begin. We got so much to talk to with Jackie today about the documentary, the book, his illustrious career, but I'd like to take you back a little bit. I'd like to start by discussing music. Your showbiz career began there, and I think it progressed very naturally, very organically. I mean, through a lot of hard work, of course, in music. So if you could take our listeners back what it was like when you started entertaining for people, in Oyster Bay and within your earlier bands. We'd love to hear
Well,
about
I
that.
grew up in the North Shore of Long Island, in a little hamlet called East Norwich, and I first started entertaining in first grade. I was a candy cane, and then in third grade I was Peter Cratchit in the Bird's Christmas Carol, which was exciting because the principal came into the third grade class and called me out of class. And, it's a tiny school. It's pretty intimidating. And she pulls me out in the hall and she says, "Do you want to be in the school play?" I'm like, Jesus, you could have told me it wasn't something serious. And then I actually got asked to host I was the MC of a blue and gold dinner for the Cub Scouts and actually told a dick joke. That was probably my first laugh. And I saw my cousin tell a dirty joke in third grade, and that caught my attention. But what happened was a guy I went to kindergarten with around seventh grade or so. I got wind of the fact that he was playing the guitar. And I went up to him and I said, "What's with the guitar?" He said, "Well, I met a girl in Sunday school and she told me she thought Ricky Nelson was really cool because he sang and played guitar. So I signed up for guitar lessons. And then I went back to Sunday school and the girl moved. I never saw her again." He said, "But if you want, I can teach you 4 chords and we can have a band." I said, "That sounds good to me. It made it a lot easier to chase girls with a guitar."
Absolutely.
So he taught me 4 chords and we had a band all through high school. And then I had a band all through college. And then when I came up for college, the entire 70s, I wrote songs, and me and this guy, same guy that taught me guitar, the two of us played original songs and told dirty jokes and played acoustic guitars and drove around in a 1955 bright yellow Cadillac hearse.
Nice.
And we got nowhere. I tried so hard. I have the same conversations with everybody I talk to, that art is such a weird thing because how successful you are and how good you are and how much money you make at it has very little relevance to how much you love it, how much work you put into it, how much sweat and heart. I'm telling you, I worked so hard on my songs and I love my songs and I was so dug in, but I sucked and I got nowhere. And in like 1978, the other two guys were a 3-piece band that by the end of the 70s, we had added an organ player who also played bass with his left hand. So, a piano player. And it was just great. We kicked ass. Everybody loved us. The songs were great. The jokes were great, but we were terrible. We made no money. And one night, it's a 3-piece band. And at the end of the night, the other two guys said to me, "Jackie, we're going to leave the band and start our own band." And I said, "Listen, you assholes." I said, "I'm not a rocket scientist, but if 3 guys are in a band and 2 of them leave to start their own band, that's kicking me out of the fucking band. Let's go,
Yes.
So by then but the truth was I told all the jokes and I wrote most of the songs. So it really was my band. And then I started, I met a guy, it's all in my book, it's a long story, but I met a guy and started telling jokes on stage. And the transition was I was a singer-songwriter who told jokes, and I went from a guitar player who told jokes to being a guy who told jokes that played the guitar.
Yes.
Which sounds kind of subtle, but all of a sudden, I'm up on stage, and the main thing was telling my dirty jokes.
Right.
And from working in a studio in the 70s, I knew how to make a record, and so I made a record. I was in comedy 6 months, and I had my own comedy LP, which, it sucked, but it still was impressive. That's quite a calling card, your own album,
Holding a record, then it's just people can't even know the concept. Can't even get the context of it. Some people alive now, and you were so groundbreaking in that. Now you said you knew a little bit around the studio. Did you engineer, mix all these things on your own? These records that you were putting out.
The way my life has gone, I gotta believe everybody's life is interesting, but it's pretty crazy. My band in the 70s played. Sorry, I played in these tiny little bars. We were too loud and dirty for a wine and cheese bar, but we weren't big and loud enough for the rock and roll bars. So we played in these little, like they're almost like pubs. And we played in the same owner had two different places. And we played in each of them one night a week. And there was another band that played there one night a week on another night. And I was writing songs about this girl, and this girl broke my heart to where I was out of my mind. And honestly, this is going to sound like an exaggeration, but I think the owner of the Neptune pub was afraid I was going to kill myself, in which case that would have been 2 nights at his clubs that weren't sold out. So he got we did a song called the Pot Song that always got 5 encores. The audience went absolutely berserk. And there was one of the guys in the other bands on a different night had started his own recording studio. And the owner said, listen, I'm going to back you guys doing the Pot Song, and we can record it at Kevin's studio. And I said, it's all right with me as long as you let me put my love song about my girlfriend Eileen on the other side. And they said, sure. And we recorded the song at the studio. But this is so crazy. The audience used to go so berserk that they said, hey, why don't we record the crowd's reaction to your song live? So Kevin and his partner, even though we played in the same places, you never see the other bands because they're there on a different night. So they came to record us, and they came to set up, and he saw that I had a foot tambourine. I actually had a tambourine with a piece of rubber over my foot.
Wow.
And that was our drummer. And you can hear it on the recordings, but it was great, you know, the thud and the tinkle. And they saw that I had a microphone on my foot tambourine. And they said, you know what, that guy has the concept of recording. And they asked me to come work at the studio.
Oh, man.
So I worked at the studio for 2 years for free, just absorbing what I could and working, playing guitar at night. And then the band broke up, and I was playing by myself, just me and my guitar. And then I met some comedians, and then the comedians started coming to my gigs. I mean, I had Eddie Murphy on the stage at the Neptune pub.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it was unbelievable. And then the guys, I was playing a couple of nights solo and a couple of nights with the band. Then the guys threw me out of the band. But in the process of working at the studio, I learned that any moron can have a record. All you need is a tape and a few dollars and a few pictures, and you send the tape and the money and the pictures to a place that makes records, and you get a record. It's like baking a cake. Now, nobody knows that. Back then, you know, like Bill Cosby had an album, and George Carlin had an album, and Robert Klein had an album, but they were put out by record companies. It was a real big deal. So the concept of having an album, nobody had any idea I did it myself, even though I told them. And it was so funny. 6 months after I recorded my album on a Nakamichi cassette player.
Wow.
With me on the left channel and the audience mics in the right channel, then transferred the cassettes to reel, edited them with a razor blade and splicing tape. I mean, in my mother's attic. I mean, I was Edison, you know.
That's so badass.
But all of a sudden, I've got this album, and I'm selling my albums at the door as people are leaving, which there isn't a person that does music or comedy nowadays that's not selling stuff on the way out, but nobody did it back then. And I'm selling my albums at the door. I'm signing my autograph and selling them for $5. And the other comics are breaking my balls. They're all making fun of me. What a jerk. And then one night somebody said, you know, we made $40 a piece tonight, and Martling made an extra $75 selling his stupid albums. Maybe he's not that dumb. And all of a sudden, duh. Then I made another album, and then I made a third album. And my future ex-wife, she came to work with me after I put out my second record. And I mean, we sent them everywhere. I mean, everywhere. If I ran into you on the street, I sent you a record. When I had 2 records, I sent you 2 records. By the time I had 3 records, we'd send all 3 records, matching cassettes, everything. If I bumped into you on the street and you said, "Oh, I like comedy, let me send you my," not knowing what's going to happen. And one of the people we sent those 3 comedy albums to with the cassettes was Howard Stern.
Right.
And so he called me up and said, "Hey, you're a riot. Come in and hang out one day." And I went in and hung out one day. Now, the great part of the story is that when I was recording the Pot song and those guys came to see me and they saw me with my foot tambourine and asked me to work at their studio, 5 years ago, one of those guys married my sister.
Wow.
I tell you, I stick to people's feet like gum, like it's unbelievable. The guy's so sweet and so talented, and he's a member of the family, but it just went on and on. And it's so funny because years ago, like 15 years ago, I wrote this crazy song, and I hadn't written a song in decades, and I got inspired. And you can cut me off if I'm going on too much.
Oh, absolutely not, man. You're going. This is heaven, man.
I was at Les Paul's 85th birthday party.
Jesus Christ.
And my friend Adam said, "You got to come meet Les. He'll love you. You'll love him." And he had been trying to get me and Fred Norris from the show for 10 or 15 years. Adam had been trying to get us to come see Les Paul. Finally, one night, my friend Carrie Ash, whose husband was the grandson of Sam Ash, like in music stores.
Yeah.
She said, "You're coming to see Les Paul tonight. If you don't get in the limo, I'm coming up and dragging you in." So she picked us up, and, my apartment was like 2 blocks away from where Les was playing. She said, "You got to come. The Rolling Stones are going to be there. It's a whole big deal." I said, "All right." So I go, and I'm sitting there. And Les Paul comes walking down the aisle of this small little jazz club, and I hear him say to my friend Adam, "Jackie the Joke Man's here tonight?" And I couldn't really believe what I heard. But old people don't sleep. They lie there all night. So the Stern Show was a godsend to him. He'd lie there awake and listen to every show. And he's a dirty old man. He loved filthy jokes. He was so great. So he goes up on stage, and he says, "Jackie the Joke Man's here." He calls me on stage, and this is year 2000. I'm still drinking, so I got some beers in me. He says, "You tell dirty jokes. Give me what you got." And I'm looking out at a packed audience. Like his 85th birthday. Jazz aficionados and music hounds and press and Keith Richards is there in his full regalia, like, with beads in his cornrows and the colored scarf, and he's there with his mother. And so I get on stage, and Les Paul says, "You tell dirty jokes. Well, give me what you got." I said, "Are you sure?" And he said, "Go ahead, give me what you got." I said, "You sure?" He said, I told 5 or 6 of the filthiest jokes I had. And blew the roof off the place. Nobody laughed harder than Les. He couldn't believe it. I said, "All right, I'm getting off while the getting's good." I sat down. Les, I'm like in euphoria, and Les Paul brings Keith Richards up on stage, and the first thing Keith Richards says to Les Paul is, "It's going to be kind of tough to follow that bloke." So Keith Richards plays a couple songs, and by now I know that his mother is in the audience, right? And it turns out Keith Richards' mother was a blues singer who'd been around the block, and she's a musician, so of course she's heard it all, right? I went to see Les Paul 50 or 60 times, and I never, ever saw him call somebody up to the stage for a second time. Keith Richards got off the stage. Les played another song, and he said, "Jackie the Joke Man, come back up here. Come back up here." And I'm like, he was so, enamored of the jokes and the craziness, and he knew what I did. And I came on stage, and he said, "Listen," and I said, "Wait a minute. Before you say anything," I said, "Keith, I'd just like to apologize. If I knew your mother was in the audience, I would never have told those off-color jokes. And he stood up and he said, yeah, well, I'll tell you something about your mother. And he said, and I said to the audience, I said, look at this. I'm getting heckled by a Rolling Stone. How great is that? And the audience went nuts, okay?
Oh, God.
So then Les Paul says to me, all right, Jackie, tell me, you sit there and you write notes for this guy as he goes along to make him funnier? What's the deal? And I said, Les, listen, this audience is here to see you. It's your 85th birthday. They're all your music fans. Maybe some of them know who Howard Stern is, but probably a lot of them have no idea. They don't really care. Listen, do your show, play your songs, have a great time. And when we're done, we'll go to the bar, we'll have a few beers. And who knows, maybe Keith will join us at the bar. And you know what? Maybe he'll even buy. And you know what? If he doesn't have any money on him, maybe he could use some of those fucking beads that are in his head. Holy Christ. I'm telling you, the roof came off the place, and then I turned to the audience and said, now I'm fucking with a Rolling Stone. How good is that? And I had never heard such a loud cheer in my life, and I hugged Les Paul, went and sat at the table, and for the next 9 years, we were asshole buddies. And every time I went to see him, he brought me up on stage. This all ties into what we're talking about. So I go on stage and I tell jokes at the Iridium with him every couple of weeks. And everybody goes nuts, but nobody loves the dirty jokes more than Les Paul. So he's got ridiculous musicians. And there's this guy, Frank Vignola, who's a world-renowned guitar player, who's his guitar player. Now, if you're Les Paul's guitar player, it's kind of like being Dolly Parton's tit stand-in. You know what I mean? So I go up to Frank Vignola. One of the nights after I get done, I walk up to him and said, Frank, listen, I know how incredible you guys are. I feel like such a jerk up there with these stupid jokes with world-class musicians. Does it upset you guys? He said, are you kidding? You bring so much energy. Oh, my God. We love it when you're here. So I was so thrilled.
Oh, gosh. That's...
Next time or 2 times later, whatever, we're in the green room, and I go up to Frank Vignola, and I say, Frank, do you smoke pot? He said, what, are you kidding? And I gave him a big manila envelope full of my homegrown pot. Well, now that's sealed. Now we are ridiculous friends. Every time I show up to see Les, I come up and tell jokes. I give Frank more pot. We're really, really tight. So I hadn't written a song in 20 years. And I'm driving into Manhattan. And I have this girl that is a good friend of mine named JC. I just love her, who lived in Las Vegas at the time. And I'm driving along in my car, and I got a bowl of pot, and I've got my phone on Bluetooth, so my hands are free to light the pipe. And I called JC, and I get her answering machine. And she says, I'm sorry I'm not here. And I said, Jesus, I left a message. Jay, I can't believe it. I got 45 minutes before I get to my apartment. We could have shot the shit and came up, brought each other up to date. Damn it. Oh, well, at any rate, I'm smoking pot. I got my dick out, and I'm thinking about you. And I hung up. And then I said to myself, holy Christ, I'm smoking pot. I got my dick out. And I start singing to myself. And the people in the cars, Nick, in the other lanes are looking at me like, what's wrong with this guy? I'm stoned out of my mind. I put on my micro cassette recorder. I go, I'm smoking pot. I got my dick out. And I'm thinking about you. Thinking about you. I'm driving along, singing a song. And I got my dick out. Thinking about, and I'm dying. I get to my apartment. I play the micro cassette while I'm recording myself with my Casio little video thing on my camera, and I play that back. I'm smoking pot while I'm lighting a joint and smoking it. I still got the little piece of tape that's hysterical. And I called Frank Vignola. I said, "Listen, Frank, I got his answering machine. I just wrote either the world's worst song or the world's best song. I have no idea. I'm going to send it to you." I sent him the MP3. He called me back. He said, that's the greatest fucking thing I've ever heard. we got to record it. So I went in the studio with Frank and his partner Joe and another guy, and we spent hours in the studio. And I'm making up words as we go along for this stupid song, and we come up with this masterpiece that so many people just love. And we get done, and he goes, "This is so much fun." He says, "Do you got any other songs?" And I said, "As a matter of fact, I got way too many of them from back when I quit music." And we wound up recording an album right here at Jokeland. We did a whole album called Happy Endings, and
That's perfect.
and everybody loves it. I don't know if I sent you a copy of it. If I didn't, I just mailed you my book, so I think I put a copy of Happy Endings in it.
Thank you so much, man.
And that song, "I'm Smoking Pot, I Got My Dick Out," the whole world has heard that song and loves it. I get hate mail from people saying, "I can't get your stupid song out of my head," which is just so much fun. And that was my entree back into music. So
Right.
that, and that that was it, just that one song. But my God, it was just spectacular and so fun. And it was, I used it as a theme song to I had a radio show on Sirius for 8 years on Howard's channel called Jackie's Joke Hunt. And that was insane.
Oh,
And
yeah.
So I just been carrying on, and that's what I do. I haven't put out an album in 10 years, but I have 6 killer albums that I sell for $20 for all 6 downloads, and people go nuts. They kind of can't believe how much. It's like 500 minutes of filthy jokes for $20. It's ridiculous.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And they're just, you are the joke, man. You know every joke. That is no exaggeration, my friend. And getting back to the comedy a little bit, you worked with so many legendary comics. I'm sure something that you've stated before was huge for you. One of my favorite comics is when you got to work with Rodney Dangerfield. And you got to sell him jokes. And it's about that statement alone, "I sold Rodney Dangerfield jokes," is one of the fucking coolest statements anybody can make in this life. So,
and the way it came about is so fun. That came about because the guy I started with is full of shit. And all comics, everybody starting out is full of crap because we're all scratching and clawing and trying to get ahead. And I had moved into my grandmother's house after she died with my girlfriend, and I had just quit the band, and I'm floundering. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I got my shows at Neptune Pub and Eddie Murphy and Bob Nelson and Minervini and Rob Bartlett. They would all come by and do 5 minutes. So there was no place on Long Island to do comedy except this place, Richard M. Dixon's White House Inn, where I met all these guys. So my friend Richie Minervini would stop in once in a while and spend the night at my grandmother's house with us. And he came in one night and he said, "Oh, man, I went to Dangerfield's tonight, and I got on and I killed. And Rodney loved me, and he told me he's going to use me whenever he can. It was so great." So I was so jealous. Here, we're young guys, and anything would get to go, anything to happen. And I'm so freaked out. So I sit down at the typewriter. Meanwhile, I'm living at my grandmother's, and a couple of weeks earlier, a friend of mine was in Peru selling coke, doing coke, and he called me at 4 a.m. and kept me on the phone long enough so I'd remember, because he knew I was drunk. He said, "Chief, you got to hear this joke. This guy, Tennessee Bob, told me this joke. It's the greatest joke." And he told me the 2-bagger joke. So I wrote it down. Do you know what the 2-bagger is?
Oh, yes, sir. I know the 2-bagger.
So he tells me that joke. So I sit down, and I'm going to write jokes down for Rodney because now I got to in with him because Richie's his friend. So I write 6 pages of every joke I can think of that I can twist into a Rodney Dangerfield scenario. And I type 6 pages, and I got a carbon copy of it and do the whole thing and take the 6 pages and fold them up and put them in an envelope, put Rodney Dangerfield. And the next time Richie walked in, I said, "Richie, you got to do me a favor. You got to give these jokes to your friend Rodney Dangerfield." And he goes, "Oh, man." He's, "Oh, man, I didn't meet Rodney. I didn't even get on stage. He wasn't even there. I'm like, you motherfucker. He goes, but I was there, and I swear to God, this is true. There's no reason you should believe me, Johnny, but he reached his pocket and took out a matchbook. And it said Dangerfields, and it had the address. And I already had the envelope that said Rodney Dangerfield. I just wrote in the address and just mailed it. I had nothing to lose. And 2 days later, the phone rings, and I'm at my grandmother's. Now, she's dead. Everybody she knows is dead. Nobody has this phone number. Nobody knows. And the phone rings. I'm like, Jesus Christ. And I answer the phone. Hello? I said, who is this? It's Rodney. I said, Rodney who? Oh, I knew you were fucking funny, you know. I knew you were funny. I could tell you're fucking funny. Some funny shit here. I'll tell you, this two baggers, the funniest fucking joke I ever heard. You got to come to Westbury. Come on, come to Westbury. You know, if it's on me, you come in. We're talking to dressing room. I want to buy 4 of these jokes. I'll give you a couple $100 and blah, blah, blah. So my girlfriend's like, who's on the phone? I said, it's Rodney Dangerfield. She says, fuck it. Who's on the phone? Richie? I said, it's Rodney. So a couple days later, he's at Westbury Music Fair. We go into the dressing room. I got a ponytail and ripped blue jeans. My girlfriend's 10 years younger. She's beautiful. And Rodney's head exploded. Oh, Jesus Christ, look at her. She's beautiful. What's with the fucking hair? Holy God. You want some fruit? It's good fruit. Whoa, she's beautiful. Hey, I love these shows. Two bags. Really funny. Why don't you cut your fucking hair, blue jeans? What are you doing? She's beautiful. Hey, have a piece of fruit. I'm telling you, our heads were spinning. It was unreal. And then we go out, and he does his show, and he does the two-bagger joke, and the house comes down. And he gave me a check for $200, and it went on, you know. And I only sold him a couple of jokes after that, here and there. But then there were times when he used jokes, and he hadn't bought them. But not because he was subversive. It just, he was, you know, he's full of coke and full of pot and full of booze, and he was all over the place. He wasn't exactly an accountant. And so finally one night I said to him, listen, you use jokes that you never bought. He said, all right, well, and I borrowed $1,000 from him to reprint my first album. I hadn't sold the first 1,000. I probably gave away 900 of them, but I needed to reprint it. And so he wrote me a check for $1,000, and I said, listen, you know, you're using jokes. He said, all right, listen. Let's say I used 10 that I didn't buy. So you owe me 10 more jokes. You know, you owe me $500. You owe me 10 more jokes. I said, all right. And it was his idea and his concept. And when I tried to explain that on the Howard Stern show, they ran me over the rails. I get emails every day from people saying, pay Rodney the money you owe him, you asshole. It was... You know, like a year later, I wrote to him and said, I want to borrow $2,000 more, and he never answered me. By the time he left the show that day, Howard had me owing him $3,000. It was just really funny. It was really funny. But I loved the guy, and we had so much fun. And he always said, that fucking two-bagger is the best joke I ever had. I could never be mad at you. It's the best joke I ever had. And then I bugged him, and he finally took me away with him for 2 weeks. And I am still pulling stories out of my ass from those 2 weeks. We went to Fort Lauderdale for a week. He was just, you know, hanging out and going in the pool and going, you know, his daughter was there and her friend and his son. And then we flew to Las Vegas, and he was at the Aladdin with Paul Williams.
Oh.
You know, we spent a Sunday afternoon at Paul Williams' house. Me, Rodney, Paul Williams, and Paul Williams' wife, Katie. And we did enough cocaine for a football team. We drank and smoked pot. We were out of our fucking minds. And like 30 years later, Paul Williams has been sober for 30 years.
Right.
And at some point I emailed him and said, Paul, this is Jackie Martling. Do you remember me? He says, we spent an afternoon doing cocaine with Rodney Dangerfield. What do you mean, do I remember you? You know what I mean? It was just, you know.
Well,
so,
you know, him too. Just think of that experience you had. I mean, there are people that would pay to be in that, because Paul Williams, you take his musical genius away, he was just ubiquitous all through the 70s. You would just see him everywhere. And a great rock on tour, and just everything I know of the guy, just a sweetheart of a guy.
Yeah, but then, he kind of hit the wall.
Mm-hmm.
He was getting a little too high for himself years ago, and I was working in Knoxville. and I was doing a show. This is so long ago. It was a local show called Crook and Chase. Charlie Chase and some girl named Crook. After that, they became national, became huge, and then completely went away. You know, I've watched so many people come and go, it's unreal, but they were brand new in Knoxville, and it was a talk show, and I was there promoting my show at the Funny Bone in Knoxville, and the guest before me was Paul Williams. And I never got to talk. I never got to talk to him and say, "Hey, Paul, remember the time with Rodney?" Because he was shuffled out, I was shuffled in. But I've never forgotten it. We're sitting there, and they're interviewing him. They said, "Paul, you're such a superstar. You're such a major talent. But have you ever written any songs that didn't make it?" And he said, "Of course." And they said, "Like what?" He said, "Brown Christmas." It doesn't get any funnier than that. I thought I was going to die. What a funny line. Holy Jesus Christ.
Now, I want to bring one more thing up about the Rodney time, because on this Vegas trip, weren't you doing the Joe Ancis role in the crowd for the...
You know, it's funny because I know everybody. A good friend of mine is the guy that actually... he sold the company, but his company was Final Draft.
Yes, yeah, screenwriting software, yeah.
Final Draft software, and he's got a lot of rich friends. So we're having breakfast in New York, and one of his friends comes down. His friend's telling me how he's good friends with Brian Roy, who's Rodney's son, and how Brian was a pretty bad drinker, and he got drunk, and he was almost getting fights, and at the last minute he'd say, "This is Rodney Dangerfield's son." And all of a sudden, from wanting to kill a guy, the people want to, make him king. It's just amazing, the strength. So I get contacted by Joe Ancis's children.
Oh my gosh!
It turns out that Gordon and I forget her name, but they're trying to gather information on their father, because very few people really knew about him. For anybody that doesn't know, Joe Ancis was the sidekick to Rodney Dangerfield, who was Jack Roy back then, and Lenny Bruce and Buddy Hackett. They all hung around, and supposedly Joe Ancis was the funniest guy by far. He was unbelievable, and they all loved him, but he did not have the balls to take it to the stage.
Right.
So his kids are looking for him, and they're saying, blah, 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 and we've never been able to find Brian Roy. I said, I can help you find Brian Roy. I know a guy. So I called the guy. And the guy said, well, I can put you in touch. And he put me in touch with Brian Roy's college roommate. And he's telling me stories about them going to Dangerfields and eating steaks and eating shrimp and chasing broads. And, it's unbelievable. But Joe Ancis, Rodney said the most fun that they had was him and Joe Ancis would stand in the hall with the door to his apartment barely open, and they would watch Rodney's maid, Thelma. They'd watch her watch game shows. He said she would go fucking, take the money, get the door number 3, because she didn't know anybody was there. They said, and that was entertainment to these maniacs. So Joe's job was he'd stand in the back of the room, and when it got to a certain point in Rodney's act, he would yell something out, and that's what I did when we were in Las Vegas. And he's at the Aladdin. Show business really, really sucks. It really does. We got off the plane in Las Vegas, and there was a celebrity doing the announcements of what planes are in what gate or whatever.
Yeah.
And Rodney says, "You hear that? That was my fucking idea, It was my idea. That's Henny Youngman. You hear that? Well, they got all different celebrities. This is Las Vegas. Everything is celebrities. So, Henny Youngman's saying go to gate 3, and Buddy it's my fucking idea." So we pull up in a limo at the Aladdin, and I'm with this major superstar. I mean, he hadn't made movies yet, but he was ubiquitous because they had made all these Bud Light commercials in 1980, 1979, and it was Rodney with all these different sports stars, baseball stars, football stars, whatever. But they were all with Rodney, and it was the greatest. But people would see him on Dean Martin or they'd see him on Carson, but that's once every month, once every 3 weeks, you know. Now people are seeing him over and over and over on every channel. It was a major, major run of commercials. He's like, I can't believe it. Everybody fucking knows me. You know, I used to walk through a crowd. Now it's like, Rodney, hey, Rodney. Hey, it's kind of nice, you know. They fucking know me, you know. So he loves this, and it's all crazy. So he's a big celebrity. We get out of the limo. We walk in the hotel. The first thing he does is walks up to the ticket window and asks her, how are sales? And I said to myself, holy shit, it never ends.
Right.
It never ends. Here's a celebrity. You think the last thing on his mind would be how many people are going to be at his show. And he wants to know how sales are. How's the crowd going to be? I'm like, and that's when I realized that this will never go away. This is your life. This is how it's going to be. And
this is like 1980, right?
Easter time, 1980. There's nobody in town. I don't know how old you are, but Easter time, 1980 was the heart of one of the gas strikes. So people weren't even going to the next town, let alone driving to Las Vegas. And it was a ghost town, just a ghost town. And but the crowds are maybe half full, 2/3 full, because it's still Rodney. It's funny. He took me down to see Wayne Newton. And here we are in the middle of a gas strike, and the people are 4 across in line around the entire hotel, waiting in line to get in to see Wayne Newton.
Wow.
And we're walking along, and Rodney's like, what the fuck are you doing? Why don't you go see a real show? This is bullshit. What the fuck are you doing? Cocksucker. You don't want to see this motherfucker. So he seats me in there, and I saw Wayne Newton, and he was great. You know, it was really hysterical. But my job was I'm in the back of the crowd, and at some point in Rodney's act, I yelled, so what do you do for a living? Like a heckler. He goes, I get guys for your sister. Why don't you come in the bathroom with me? I'll show you how small you really are. And of course, the old ladies in the place, they're turning around and looking at me like I'm a heckler, like I'm trying to screw up the show. And meanwhile, that was my job, you know, which I just reveled in it. I just loved it. It was fantastic.
Right. Well, wait, before we get off Rodney here, what did Rodney say about Joe E. Ross? What did he say about him? Did he say
Joey? He used to tell stories about Joey Ross. Let me tell you about Joey Ross. Let me tell you about Joey Ross. One night, him and another guy were in a play in Chicago. A couple of thespians. There were 2 thespians, and an admiral, a Navy admiral, and his wife said, "You're so wonderful. You must join us for dinner." And so these 2 thespians, Joey Ross, who walked out of the sea. Joey Ross was half animal. He walked out of the sea. He was a thug. And then he walked into car 54, and all of a sudden he was somebody. You know, he's a lowlife. You know, he said that, the General Electric had a huge party to celebrate car 54 being #1. It's all the executives are there. So Francis is there. Muldoon, you know.
Yeah, Fred Gwynn.
There with his big Fred Gwynn's dressed to the hilt. He's there with his wife. And Joey Ross is there with a hooker. And they're talking to the head of Mr. Gwynn, yes. And this is my wife, Cheryl, yeah. And nice to meet you, Joey. He goes, yeah. And he turns to his date and says, what was your name, honey? He walked in out of the sea. He was an animal. He says, so they go to the Admiral's home, and they have dinner with the Admiral and his wife, and they keep toasting the Admiral, these 2 thespians. They toast the Admiral, but every time they take a toast, these guys throw their drinks under the table. And the Admiral gets totally loaded and passes out drunk. One guy fucked the Admiral's wife, and the other guy stole his overcoat. A couple of thespians. Well, and Rodney loved telling Joey Ross stories more than anything. I guess he was infamous. People already knew he was like like what he looked like in Car 54. That's who he was. You know, this little hairy monster. It's so
I can
those
only
stories,
imagine.
They never get old. Those stories never get old.
And then it's like when you and another guy that I feel I would call a peer of yours, definitely, who tells the jokes right, Gilbert Gottfried. It's like hearing you two get together. The fucking Hollywood, just the showbiz fucking stories you guys tell. I've listened to some of those episodes. I don't know how many times, man. And it's a blast to talk about those old things, man. They're gonna get lost if you don't keep talking about them.
You know, I was out in Las Vegas, and there was a guy when I was working in the studio in the 70s. A guy came in with his partner because they had won the American Song Festival, and they won a grand piano and they won a couple hours to record at a studio. And they came into my buddy's studio, and this guy would fool around and play the piano and do funny stuff in between takes and stuff. And I said to him, you know, Dennis, I'm just branching out and trying to become a comedian, and I think I got a chance. And you're 5 times funnier than me, man. You should do something. He goes, yeah, you know. And then one time he came in and said, Jackie, I got up at Dangerfields. I had a couple of rum and cokes. I got up at Dangerfields and played my guitar and did a couple of jokes, and they loved me. And Rodney said to me, hey, hurry up and get good so I can use you. So Dennis Blair wound up being Rodney's opening act for like 5 years. Then he was Joan Rivers' opening act for 10 years. And then for like 15 years, he was George Carlin's opening act.
Wow.
And he was a good friend and still is a good friend. So I went out to Las Vegas a month ago, and I hadn't seen him in forever. He actually married a girl from my hometown. And me and this guy, John Scott, and Dennis and his wife, we sat there telling stories. And John said, you got to come out here. We got to record these because it's just like the Gilbert shows, just like the podcast. John was just dying because, you know, Dennis says something, makes me think of something, makes him, but he's been around the block with, you know, everybody. And the stories are just hysterical.
Well,
What have you heard? Did you hear the Steve Rossi story?
I've not heard the Steve Rossi story. But very, very quickly, is Dennis the guy that used the guitar?
Yes.
Okay, because
yes.
I saw Carlin several times, and he was every time we get there, obviously too late or something. He'd already be on. He would already be on, his opener would, and that guy was amazing, man.
That's Dennis Blair. He's just fantastic. I just, you know, a good friend forever.
But the Steve Rossi story, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, well, when you hear this, you might stop me and say, no, I heard you tell that. I actually was out in Las Vegas about 10 years ago and went to lunch with Steve Rossi and Rich Little and like the main owner of one of the huge hotels. And we're sitting there, and because Steve never saw a free meal he could pass up. You know, I remember one time he was on the Stern Show. We walked all the way across town to go to the Astro Diner because the guy wouldn't let him pay. I mean, he was just the greatest show business character of all. Now, when he started in show business in the late 40s, he started as a crooner and an MC. He wound up, you know, being Alan and Rossi. You know who they were, right?
Oh, yeah.
Marty Allen, Steve. They were actually on Ed Sullivan with the Beatles.
That's right.
So Steve tells a story, but we're at lunch and we're all telling stories. And at the end of lunch, I said, Steve, how could you not tell the Mae West story? He said, oh, you know what? I didn't even think of it. I said, are you kidding? That's the golden crown of the stories in my life. I saved that as my main punch at the end when I'm talking to people. So by the late 40s, Mae West is very old.
Yeah.
But she's still got that hourglass figure, and she's still got that smirk, and she's still the same. And her stage show was she had like 6 or 8 weightlifters, bodybuilders, that are on stage just wearing slingshot bathing suits, completely coated with oil, right?
Right.
And she would walk up and down, like rubbing their muscles and saying lewd things that I'm sure weren't lewd at all, but from late 40s United States, she's lucky she didn't get locked up, right?
Right.
But that's her act. Steve Rossi's, it's his first gig in show business, and he's the MC. He goes out and says, hello, welcome to Mae West's show, and he sings a song and then introduces her, okay? His first night, she calls him into her dressing room after the show. And here he is. I don't know whether he was 20, I don't know if he was 30, whatever it was, but he's brand new. She calls him into her dressing room and pulls him over to the side of the bed. So he's standing in front of her on the side of the bed. She pulls down his zipper and his pants and his other pants and pulls him down to his ankles. She takes her teeth out, puts them in a glass of water on the side of the bed, and gives him an incredible blowjob. And he can't believe it. And when he has an orgasm, he freaks and goes, ah! And he pulls off her blonde wig. And he's looking down at a bald 65-year-old woman with no teeth and a mouthful of his jizz. And he said, I think that was my welcome to show business. Now, even if that's a lie, that's too good a story to not tell, but that is a true story.
Even if it's a lie.
I told that story at lunch, and the guy's like, Steve, how could you leave that story out? He said, I didn't think of it,
Right. Well,
I mean, how crazy is that? I mean, that's
insane. Now,
that's just wonderful,
Before I want to talk about your time on Howard Stern, shaking the world and changing the world with that show. But I want to, while we're on this, speaking of that story you just told, a guy much like Joe Ansis that it has this mystery around him to a certain extent. Pat McCormick. I know you were around him a little bit. Do you have any Pat McCormick stories?
The only Pat McCormick stories I have, I don't really know any off the top of my head because they've all come to me from other people, but they're all unbelievable. My only Pat McCormick story is we were sitting there on the Stern Show one day, and all of a sudden there's this boom, and through the door comes Jack Riley, who was one of Bob Newhart's one of Bob Newhart's clients when he played the psychiatrist on television. Chuck McCann, who was a New York child host when I was a kid, he had a kids show. Sam Kinison and Pat McCormick. They come blasting in at 6:15 in the morning. Sam had done a show at the Comedy Store. He got done. They did a bunch of coke, and he said, "Come on, man, let's go do the Howard Stern show." And they got on Sam's plane, on Sam's jet, and flew to New York, and came bursting into the Howard Stern show, out of their minds. And I'm sitting there, and behind me, I'm looking at Kinison and Riley and McCormick and McCann. It was like the Mount Rushmore of comedy, and I'm like, holy, of course, this is long before the days of cell phones. What I wouldn't give for a copy of that.
Oh, yeah. And then for any of our listeners who don't know, Pat McCormick was a brilliant comedy writer, but people my age might know him as better as Big Enos Burdett in Smokey and the Bandit. So that's who we're talking about here.
Yeah, he was like a writer on Laugh-In, and he was like head writer of Carson for a while. He was about 6'8". He was monstrous and fat and just as crazy as a loon. And there's so many stories about the crap that he pulled, practical jokes and,
Oh, yeah. Well, let's get to your time on the Stern Show. Now, you started in 83 because you did 3 years for free, right?
What happened was I was working at Garvin's, which was a comedy club, Garvin's Laugh-In, in Washington, D.C., and the owner, Harry Montecruso, said, Jackie, there's a guy who was doing broadcasts in his underwear on Friday mornings from the club, and he just got fired by DC 101, but he got hired by NBC AM up in New York City. You really should look him up because he would love you. And I'm like, all right. So at the time, me and Nancy are sending out records and cassettes to everybody. I mean, we couldn't afford it. We didn't have any money. And the postage and the price of making cassettes and records, it just was staggering. And I had to dial a joke that cost me a fortune, which never made me a penny. 516-922-WINE. Still going.
Still going.
Still going. People cannot believe it. But it got me, it's gotten me everything. At one point in 1984, Rick Dees told the entire national audience that 516-922-9463 was Tom Selleck's home phone number. So it went nuts. So I send these records to this guy. I never heard Howard Stern. I didn't listen to the radio. I'm a hippie. I listen to Eagles tapes and my own music and tapes of my jokes. Once in a while I listen to 1010 Wins to see if the world's still here. And so we send point blank, just like I sent the jokes to Rodney, just like I wrote to Gershon Legman, which is a whole nother tale that is something you'd be interested in on another planet. And I sent these albums to Howard Stern, care WNBC. Who knew if they'd wind up in a pile? Who knew if they'd wind up, dead letters? Who knows?
Yeah.
So I'm in my mother's attic. That's where my office was. I'm in my mother's attic with the 10 dial joke machines.
Jokeland.
Huh?
Jokeland, right?
The first Jokeland, the attic of my mother's house. And it was so funny. I started this 922-WINE because we had a comedy show that we were just starting at a restaurant, but we had no way to promote it. We had no money. So I got the bright idea, why don't I get a phone line and put jokes on it and then say, well, we're working. So we did. It was immediately busy all the time. So I called the phone company and said, listen, I need a rollover line so it rolls to a second line. And the guy says, we can't do that. You're not in the business zone. I said, come on. The guy says, wait a minute. Is this the guy with the jokes? And I said, yeah. He says, hang on. He gets the foreman on the phone and says, all right, we're going to give it to you. Every time I added more lines, they would come to my house because they wanted to see this operation. I went from 1 to 2 to 4 to 6 to 10 lines in my mother's attic. The foreman would come with the workmen and they'd look and they just couldn't believe it. And there were phone-made answering machines. I think I kept that business. I kept them in business for an extra 2 years because nobody was using that crap. So Nancy calls me up because by now we've rented a house. And she says, Jackie, that disc jockey Howard Stern just called. He wants you to call him. He liked the records. I said, really? So I called WNBC. Howard gets right on the phone and says, hey, listen, man, we listen to your records. You know every joke. You want to come in today and hang out on the radio? We're doing a talent contest over the telephone. I said, yeah, what am I doing? I'm hosting Governor's Comedy Shop in Levittown, and this is Manhattan. I'm like, whoa. I get in my car, I go in, I sit down with Howard and Robin and Fred, which is the same 3 people I was sitting with the last time I was in there in March of 2001. And we sat there and laughed our asses off for 4 hours. And at the end of the day, Howard said, man, you're a lot of fun. Why don't you come back next week? I came back the next week, and I came back the next week for 3 years for free. At some point, Nancy got him to where he was supposed to give me parking money, which he would always forget, or he didn't have money on him. It was just a running joke. And a couple times I walked out because he was so shitty. But then, slowly but surely, I was passing him ideas more and more. And then he got fired. And then he got rehired at K-Rock, and I was on 1 day a week again. And then it's so funny. I was in Virginia Beach at the comedy club. I pulled up, and the owner says, Jackie, you got to call home. I'm like, oh, nobody called me on the road.
Right.
Nancy never called me, so that meant if somebody was dead. And I called up, and she said, listen, Howard Stern wants you to call him. I'm like, oh, boy. So I called up and said, hey, listen, man, we're going to mornings. The rumor had been that we're going to go to mornings, but, nobody expected it. He said, we'll go in the morning starting on Monday. I need a price for 2 days a week. I gave him a ridiculously low price, and I came in for 2 days a week. And I went from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 days a week within a couple months because, not to be pompous, but he was much funnier when I was there because I was passing notes. And the only job description I had was I need you to come in twice a week, and I want you to do your thing with the notes. That was the total job description for 15 years. Do your thing with the notes. So I came in and I'm passing him notes, and he got funnier and funnier and funnier and funnier in the show. It literally went, that whole thing, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
But the rest really was history,
Oh, absolutely. The passing notes thing, now, these ideas you were giving him, even when you guys were bagging on one another, you're passing him the fucking notes for the things he's saying back to you.
Yeah, sometimes I'd give him something to say about me. Sometimes I'd give him stuff to say about Fred, but he'd make it about me. Sometimes I'd give him something to say about me, but he'd make it about Gary. Sometimes we'd miss it in passing. He'd circle around and come back to the joke because it was so strong. I mean, it was a phenomenon, and it was a phenomenon that a lot of people didn't know about, and slowly but surely they did. But to this day, there's still lots of people that have no idea, which is because nobody cares. When you're watching The Tonight Show, you're not saying to yourself, gee, I wonder who wrote that joke for Johnny. Who
Right.
gives a fuck? You just want to laugh and enjoy yourself, So it was interesting as hell. But
did you have any idea of the rocket ship you were climbing into? Any of you?
Nobody did. Nobody did. Howard didn't. Nobody had any idea. When I first got there, after I'd been there a while, I ran into a guy. He said, listen, I used to live in Washington, D.C., and I was a big Stern fan, and now I hear him up here. And the difference is he used to be outrageous and funny, but now he's funny and outrageous.
Right.
He said it's subtle, but he's so much funnier. And you can be so much, if you're making people laugh, that takes so much of the sting out of it. And I would write things that would be him bagging on himself, which he just had never, ever done. I can still distinctly remember the first time I did that, and everybody kind of took a breath because he was bitching and moaning about something, and bitching and moaning, which is what he did. And I wrote a note, and I put it in front of him, and he kind of balked for a second, and then he said it. He was complaining, and then he said, walk a mile in my nose, Robin. And it just let the steam out of all his complaining, like he fucked with himself, and it just made him human, It was just, and that was the kind of subtle thing that, and we got funnier and funnier and funnier, and, I just knew his voice, I knew what worked. And there was so many things, so many times I'd put up a note and he read it before he read it.
Right.
You know what I mean? He just trusted me implicitly, which was, we were such a well-oiled machine. It was a wild thing to watch.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And the greatest art in the world. And I consider those mornings art. It's so transcendent, and those interviews, those back and forths, everything on there's just pure gold, man. Now, how did you adjust to the morning routine, the morning lifestyle of getting? What time did you have to get up to be there?
I didn't. Like all of a sudden, it's so funny because I didn't realize until a couple of months ago that every morning I was getting up at 4:20. How ironic is that? All of a sudden it hit me one time. I was like, Jesus Christ, I got up at 4:20 because I never had I had every clock in my house set to a different time because I didn't want to, if I was late in the living room, I'd go in the kitchen because I didn't want to acknowledge how crazy it was. But in my entire life, I think I got up that early twice.
Right.
Right. Once to go fishing and once to catch a ride with my friend from Saratoga. I could count them on my hand. And all of a sudden we're getting up at 4:20. And I said, this isn't even the morning. This is yesterday. You know what I mean? It's crazy. I've been a comic and a musician my whole life. You'd watch 2 Bob Newharts and 3 Mary Tyler Moores. And then at 5 o'clock in the morning, the comedian said, "Here's Lucy," was God's way of telling comedians to go to fucking bed.
Right.
And all of a sudden, and I remember there was a disc jockey on WNEW who's passed away, and he wound up destroying his legacy because I guess he was fooling around with underage kids or whatever, but nobody knew. But this guy, Dave Herman, who was a nice guy, and it was long past his prime, and he was doing afternoons. We were doing middays after us. And after, I don't know, a couple of days of getting up at this hour, he had been the morning man on WNEW for 25 years. And I went up to him and I said, "Hey, Herman, Jesus Christ, man, when am I going to get used to this?" And I'm telling you, he had this huge smile, and he just smiled and said, "Never." I said, "You cocksucker, you couldn't have lied and said, well, in a month or so it'll be fine." He says, "You will never get used to it." And I'm telling you, never, ever, ever. To this day, I've been off the show 20 years. I wake up and I'm like, I don't have to get out of bed. It's like, it was, but once you get up and you're on your way, and people say, "How can you be funny in the morning?" You sit there and you have a cup of coffee, and before you start laughing, and it's off to the races.
Right.
It
Now
was a total joy.
You were still drinking at this point, so were you going out after? Were you still going out and you were trying to rock that lifestyle as well at the same time, right?
It was insane. At one point, I look back and I can't believe let alone the fact I was still drinking. We were on 5 days a week. We had a Channel 9 television show, which meant we had a blank piece of paper on Monday and had to have an hour television show all taped by Friday night.
Jesus Christ.
And I was also hosting Rascals Comedy Hour on Thursday nights in West Orange, New Jersey. And I needed a 6 or 7 minute monologue of new jokes every week. I look back and I'm like, and meanwhile, in the thick of all this, I'm recording comedy CDs and put out 6 different 80-minute comedy CDs, which not only did I have to record them, but I had to kill every time I'm on stage. So if I wanted to take out a bunch of jokes, I had to replace them with jokes that were just as good. It was insane. It was absolutely insane. But, you get through it. At one point I lost 6 family members inside of 2 years. Oh. And like, it was just crazy, crazy, crazy. But we were good. And people loved us. It made New York such a small town.
Yeah. If
If I was late, I'd have 12 cars around me yelling, "You asshole, get to work!" It was ridiculous. It was just heaven. And then I wound up breaking the thing up because, we all were pitching in, but I was the only guy who asked for more. So I looked like, it was like I asked for an extra piece of bread, and I was already making a fortune, but not relative to what was going on. And I was also totally shot. So at some point you make a deal with yourself. If I can't get this, enough of this,
right.
So, I mean, people are still mad at me and other people are like, we understand. And, but it's my life, so.
Well, I look at it, the amount of money that show was bringing in. I don't think people realize the absolute cash machine that show was in just an almost an obscene way. So I fall on the side of I totally understand what you were saying, and you more had earned that place at the table and to be able to ask for more, I believe.
Yeah, what made me seem so greedy is I was the only one asking. Fred Norris has been there for 44 or 45 years, and I don't think in his whole life he ever said the words, "Can I have more?"
Right.
He's just the biggest talent I ever knew. He's fast, funny, loyal, brilliant. I mean, he's Boy Scout times, Boy Scout squared, and but he never asked for more. So all of a sudden I'm the new guy, And I'm asking for more. I'm like, well, why don't you shut up? Why can't you be more like Fred? And I'm like, because I'm not,
Right.
He's a quiet German and I'm a loudmouth. Do the math.
Well, look at I look at the continuing, the way you guys, the love that kind of goes back and forth through some of the people that came out of that show, like you and Billy West, you and Artie. Just hearing the camaraderie that has lasted through that show from you guys is just amazing. I mean, you and Billy are always great together.
Me and Billy are still friends. I don't know if you guys know that me, Billy, and John did a thing. Did you ever see that? We did like 2 or 3 hours of us sitting at a table.
Oh, I have to go look that up immediately because I have a question about John here in just a second. It's just you guys at a table.
If you've never seen that, it's just me and Billy and John, and I think it was 3 high-def cameras. And I'll send you the link. I think I was sure you had seen it.
Please do. Please do.
I think it's called, I don't know if it's called Stern Reunion or, it's the name of the guy's company, which I totally forget.
Right.
But it's interesting. It's interesting. It was fun. We talked about everything,
Right on. And one thing I want to remind all our listeners, there's so many great stories, especially if you're a fan of Jackie's work on the Stern Show in Jackie's book, Bow to Stern.
Now wait. I got to correct you.
Okay.
It's The Joke Man.
You are
Bow to
absolutely
Stern.
right. You're absolutely
because
right.
Because if you only look up Bow to Stern, you get a 7th grade sailing manual. I swear to you.
Absolutely.
Bow to Stern is a 7th grade sailing manual. So it's got to be The Joke Man, Bow to Stern. And so many people tell me that they really love the audio version because they're driving along in the car. It's like hearing me on the radio again, which is fun. And, I'll tell you, recording that book was so much fun, Well, the trouble is you have to read your book.
Right.
I'm reading the book, and every sentence I'm thinking of 12 stories I could branch into. You know what I mean?
Yeah. How many sessions does that take? I mean, what is it? You do it in, a week or a couple days?
Well, no. All I had to do was read the book. It took 2.5 days. There was nothing to it. And the guys who were doing it were huge fans, so they were totally enthralled by the whole process. It was at Audible in Secaucus, New Jersey, and they just couldn't have been sweeter. It was so great. Really great.
Right. And another book Jackie has that I want to remind everyone is Jackie the Joke Man Martling's Disgustingly Dirty Joke Book, which is a book that will raise your spirits and cleanse your soul. I mean, such
very dirty.
Very dirty, but it's hysterical. And now I want to move into coming off the book. Jackie has an excellent documentary called Joke Man that tell us a little bit about that and tell us how that...
we tried to do it for so long. It took time. I started doing it with some guys, and my friend Tom started doing one, but that kind of fizzled out. Now I sent you a copy of that. It was no big deal. But then some other guys, we actually got going, and my old radio partner Ian said, I don't like, they were kind of making it look like what a schmuck I was for leaving the show.
Yeah, they were misrepresenting
It wasn't, they weren't telling any lies, but their tack on it was like, what was he thinking? And Ian said, no, this is about your life. This is about your legacy and your jokes. And you were on the Stern Show, but that wasn't your entire life. You're a great person, and people don't know that because Howard didn't let that out, And when people say, God, you're such a great storyteller, or like just the other day, Opie said to me, from Opie and Anthony, he said, I can't believe Howard didn't give you more airtime because your jokes and stories are so great. And I said, that's exactly why he didn't.
Right.
But I knew my place. My place was not to pitch the ball and be, my place was to, pass the notes. And there was a job I created, and I was happy with it.
Well,
but it was, it was great fun. And so finally we pieced together this thing, and the documentary actually was finished just as COVID hit.
Right.
And there was no way to take it around. And all the festivals, everything closed up. So then the festivals started opening up but not to us. Because it's about a white guy who tells dick jokes that came from a nice section of town. You know, the fact that I was blue collar and everybody around me is gazillionaires, that doesn't matter.
Right.
So we actually, it looks like we booked the first family and friends screening down in Belmore, and everybody's really, really psyched.
Oh, they should be.
And that's, but I think that's going to be invitation only. But then we're going to take it around, and I want to show it, and then do Q&A afterwards, because people, you wouldn't believe how interested people still are in this show.
Well,
And in what happened, because nobody knows what happened behind the scenes, and there's so many stories. Like I got 1/1000th. I didn't. The chapter about making private parts was probably the best chapter, and that didn't go in the book.
right.
Why? It was like Sophie's Choice. What am I going to put in? I can only have 280 pages, and I could go on and on and on, and it's so much fun.
Oh, yeah. Humble brag here. Jackie sent me the unpublished chapters from the book, and they are amazing. I mean, it's just insane, the stories Jackie has. But I want to say something about you that I've seen the film. I'm fortunate enough to have seen it. Thank you, sir. What Jackie won't say about this movie, I guarantee you, is the heart, just the beauty of the film. Seeing the love from his peers, but from his family, from his ex-wife, from his girlfriend. It is one of those really, dare I say, touching movies. And I don't use that term very often, especially on this podcast. But I mean it. You have to be just flabbergasted when you saw a first cut of this, all the love coming back at you.
Because people say it's the furthest thing from what you would expect. I'll tell you, the guy who made it, Ian Carr, has a great production company, IKA Collective, and he does all kinds of work. And he was my radio co-host for 8 years, and I met him in 2000. He had just joined the Friars Club. I had been a member of the Friars Club already for like 20 years or something. But he was a huge, huge fan of the Stern Show. Huge fan. And I met him at the Friars Club, and he was all excited to meet Jackie the Joke Man. And 5 minutes after we started talking, he said to me, "Jesus Christ, you're nowhere near the guy from that show. You're not the guy from that show." And I said, that's what Howard paints me to be, and I roll with it. I'm fine with it. He said, "You're so smart and quick and funny and personable, and how to hear Howard tell it, nobody here likes you, nobody likes to talk to you, blah, blah, blah." And Opie said, "Why didn't you tell more stories?" Anytime I told a story on that show, he'd either cut me off, or they'd say it was a crummy story, or if I told a joke, him and Robin would pretend they didn't get it. But that was part of the whole thing, was to fuck with me, and I understood that. But people don't know that. You know what I mean? When he says that's a crummy story, even if he's lying, people are like, "Oh, I guess it's a crummy story. Howard said it's a crummy story." You know what I mean? It's his power was all enveloping. But but Ian was so shocked, and then we've been really best pals for 20 years.
Well, the biggest shock for me, and I don't want to ruin any spoilers, we'll cut this out if you want me to, is when I get to the end, I'm like, who's done this bouncy, fun soundtrack throughout this whole movie? And it's you.
Yeah, that tickles me more than anything. I mean, there's songs on there that aren't mine, but most of those, instrumental cuts and or else they're actually songs from Happy Endings.
That's so great.
Just the instrumentals of the songs from Happy Endings,
Right.
And there's some kids songs I wrote, the music from them. I did 5 kids songs with the best guitar player and the best banjo player, in the world. We recorded it at Tony Bennett's son Day's studio.
Damn.
I mean, it's, the people that have touched me, and I've been lucky enough to touch it, they could fill a courthouse. It's just
Absolutely.
fun, really nuts. I gotta say, I love sending you those pictures that you don't know who they are. That's really funny.
Now, you got to give me credit now on some of those, man. I don't know many people that could pull Carmine Appice right out like that. Come on.
Anybody can do Billy Joel. Some
Right.
people could get Leslie West, but Carmine Appice, I didn't even know who the fuck that was.
Right.
I mean, I'm kidding. Now, I never asked you. You didn't really think that was my father. You knew who that was,
No,
right?
no, I was messing around at that point.
Oh,
We
but
were,
you never know because the whole world doesn't know. Professor Erwin Corey passed away a couple of years ago. He smoked pot every day of his life from the time he was 25 till the day he died at 104.
oh,
Every day he smoked pot.
he's my
Oh.
hero. I'm about halfway through that.
He was so great. Oh man.
That is, and you know, just the people you've met, Morgan Fairchild, you're friends with Sean Young, you're friends with Willie fucking Nelson. I mean, it's a testament to how cool you are, how your tenacity. Just people like you, Jackie.
Me and Willie exchange dirty jokes like once every 2 weeks or once every 3 weeks. I send him 100 jokes. He sends me one. And it's something I heard in 1950, but it's fucking Willie. He's my guy.
Yeah, Willie's. I saw Willie for the. I'm 47. I saw Willie the first time when I was in 1982. My parents took me. I think it's the first time I smelled pot at a concert. But Willie's on my Mount Rushmore of people I want to smoke with one day and interview, and I got to get on that. So, but there's so many other people in here. I don't want to ruin any of the surprises when people.
Hey,
see
I
them.
got it. I don't know if you know this story. Stop me if you heard this. What I used to do is people would come on the show, and Howard's rude. Howard would never introduce anybody, and we'd have people on the show, and it was always exciting. Always people I really loved, but people would come in there like a deer in the headlights. Like, no, they didn't know what to expect. They didn't know how much Howard was going to give them a hard time. So they weren't really open to what's going on. So they'd walk in and sit down, get interviewed, whatever. And I used to tell Steve Grillo, the intern, this is long before I had him getting people to sign autographs on the papers, which is a whole nother book that I got to put out, which is interesting. I'd have Grillo take the funniest thing I said about somebody, and they would autograph the note. And I've got 120 notes of, you could not write this eclectic list.
Oh my God!
John Wayne Bobbitt, Adam West, Barbra Streisand's sister, Vanilla Ice, Branford Marsalis, Al Michaels. You could not compose this list.
Oh, no.
Geraldo, But before that, what I'd do is I'd say, Grillo, find out the guests, either get their address or get their manager's information, and he'd get me the information, and I would send my joke stuff to the guest. And the next time the guest would come on, they would forget that they had never met me.
Right.
Because I got my joke tapes and blah, 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 and they're listening to them, they're loving them, so they're walking in, and hey, Howard, hey, Jackie, and it's so funny because they don't know, we don't know each other. And it happened with Diamond David Lee Roth, with Clarence Clemens, with Roger Daltrey.
Wow.
It wasn't being subversive. I was just trying to make them laugh because I knew they would love this stuff.
You told
So
Paul
after
McCartney a
Willie-
joke. Yeah.
Huh?
You told
So
Paul
after
McCartney.
Willie Nelson came on, I sent all my stuff to Gator, who was his bus driver. I don't know if Gator's still alive. Who knows? But Gator was Willie's bus driver forever and ever and ever and ever. I sent all my shit because he loved jokes more than anybody. And then a year or two later, an old friend of mine from a band named Zebra. Have you ever heard of Zebra?
Oh, I know Zebra. Who's behind
All
the
right.
door? Yeah.
Well, Felix and those guys did 2 weeks at the studio when I worked there, where they lock out the studio and there's no other musicians. They just, stay set up, and they did a whole album there. And I brought them home to my house for Thanksgiving, the whole deal. So here it is, 25 years later, I get an email from Felix, because email is great. Like, all of a sudden you're finding people you never spoke to in years. Jackie, this is Felix Hanneman from Zebra. Do you remember me? I'm like, I said, what are you talking about? We were up each other's ass for 2 weeks in 1975. Of course I remember you. He said, well, do you like Willie Nelson? And I'm like, what do you mean? Of course I love Willie. He said, well, listen, my girlfriend, she's now his wife, my girlfriend is a masseuse, and she massages the Giants and the Jets and some of the hockey players and Willie Nelson. And she's doing him tonight at Webster Hall. Do you want to come down and see the show and meet Willie afterwards? I'm like, are you kidding me? So I go down to Webster Hall. Fucking Willie, it's 12 o'clock and he's still playing. I got to be up at 4:30 in the morning. And I'm like, and I don't know if you know Webster Hall, but we're on the second floor. The bathroom is in the basement.
Oh.
And I'm dying, so I'm still drinking at the time. I walk all the way down to the basement, take a leak. And I'm stoned and I'm drunk, and I realize if I go back up to the seats and wind up smoking pot with Willie Nelson, I am going to wind up missing work. I'm going to get in a lot of trouble. And I bit the bullet and walked out of the club and went home. And I said, I can't believe that I'm blowing this fucking opportunity. And a couple weeks later, Felix calls me and says, listen, you missed out meeting Willie. He's playing at Westbury Music Fair on Long Island tonight. Do you want to go? I'm like, well, hell yeah. So me and Nancy go, and two of the New York Giants are going, and the four of us are there, and the four of us are walking around in the top level of Westbury Music Fair looking for a place to smoke pot. I think it was during the season, and we're looking for a place to get stoned. It's unbelievable. And after the show, we go out, and Willie Nelson always goes to his bus, hangs out for a few minutes, and then comes out and signs autograph and talks to the people until they're all gone. He has always done that. He's so fucking popular. He's just unbelievable. So we go out to the bus, and Willie's guy sees Lisa and Felix, and she's like, hey, Jackie here? Yeah, Jackie, you guys. And he sees the Giant come in. So all this big gang of people, we walk through these people, and we walk onto the bus. And Willie is sitting at his little table there in the bus. And I sit down across from him, and it's my wife and these two monstrous Giant football players, and Lisa and Felix. And I can't believe I'm sitting across from Willie Nelson. I'm like, holy Christ. I said, this is so great. And we had played together on the Stern Show.
Right.
He actually played on the road again. And I had actually played a guitar lead. I have it on tape. It's unbelievable. He says, somebody play it. I'm playing the guitar. And Howard's like, what the fuck is going on? So he says, yeah, I remember you, man. And I said, well, I got some great homegrown. He said, well, spark it up. And I take out a joint. Willie has been on this fucking bus for 50 years. The Giants are sitting there. My wife is sitting there. Felix and Lisa are sitting there. He's looking for a match. I'm like, Willie, you've been on this fucking bus for 50 years and we're looking for a match? You've got to be shitting me. And I start pulling out the drawers. You know, it's a little bus with all the little knickknacks and all the places. I swear on my mother, this is true. I pulled out a drawer, and looking up at me is a copy of my fucking CD, Hot Dogs and Donuts.
Oh, God.
And my heart raced, and I said, holy shit. And I reached in, and I looked at him, and I said, Willie, you cocksucker. I said, this was about to be my favorite story in my life, that I was on your bus looking for a match, and I found a copy of my CD, Hot Dogs and Donuts. But you motherfucker, it's still in the plastic. He laughed so fucking hard. I said, and I can't leave that out of the story because it's too priceless, you motherfucker.
Oh.
And then somehow, a couple of weeks later, a friend of mine was doing a show where people called in and emailed, but it was a special show for Sony, and it was Willie and Dr. John. It's like 3 weeks later, and we wind up on the bus again.
Good God.
I'm sitting across from him, and he goes, what are you doing here again? I said, listen, I have no fucking idea. And, I've been on that bus like a dozen times, but...
How good's his pot?
well, the last time when we did the interview for the documentary, me and Ian went down to New Orleans, where he was doing House of Blues, and we went on the bus with him to videotape. And they closed the doors, and my buddy videotaped us, me and Willie telling jokes and talking for about 10 or 12 minutes. We get done, and he pulled out his Willie's Reserve.
Ugh.
He takes a big toke, and he hands it to me, and I take a big toke. And my buddy Ian is not a pot smoker. He's a Jew. And he's like, he's a Jewish businessman, but he's a great guy. He's not a big pot smoker. But when Willie Nelson hands it to you, so he takes a hit. Ian goes into a coughing fit. So while he's coughing, I said, give me that thing again, Willie. I took another hit. Ian takes another hit, and Willie, takes a hit, and we get out off the bus because he's got to go do his show. We go in, and we can't get into the show because Ian has the package with his camera on it. The knapsack with the camera. So he's got to go back to the hotel and drop off the camera and come back. We weren't that far away, but we were so stoned out of our fucking mind. He had to find his way back to the hotel and back to House of Blues. I go in. I'm waiting for him in the back. I'm so out of my mind, I got to lean against the wall. He comes in. He finds me. He says, I can't believe I found you. And the two of us are so crazy stoned. And there's Willie. He does a 75-minute flawless set. And he's as stoned as we are. We're like, holy motherfucking God, look at that.
Yes.
It's like when you share pot with somebody, you're all in the same head. It was just spectacular.
Nice.
So, yes, he does have good weed is the answer.
Good deal. That's just golden. Well, Jackie, you have been. We could sit here all afternoon. The time you've given us is just so generous, and I just want to go back and tell everyone: go get Jackie's books. Definitely get Jackie, the Joke Man Martling, Bow to Stern, because the stories in that we couldn't cover that in 5 interviews. I mean, so many great. The story about you and your mother in the car. I know it's a very famous story. I mean, there's just so many things. But before we go, I do want to mention Stuttering John Melendez, and
one more thing, so we don't forget it. The thing, what I've been doing that people really, really love is I've been doing Cameo.com, which people hire me to tell a joke or say happy birthday or congratulations on your divorce, and it's 2 or 3 minutes of jokes. But it's great because you could say my mother is fat, she hates her uncle, he likes poop jokes, she likes Jews, my aunt's Italian. No matter what people tell me, I can go right down the line and hit every bullet point that they ask for. And I've been doing a million of these things, and it's cameo.com/Jackie Martling. I don't mean to make this into a commercial, but I've been making good money with it. But people are like, I got like 115 5-star reviews. People go nuts. So that's the end of the commercial. And one thing what I tell people is when we do a podcast, people get a lot of great feedback. I always say, listen, tell your listeners to send you questions. If they're like, boy, I'd really like to ask them about this or ask them about that, and just accumulate a bunch of questions, and then we'll do this again. And you can ask me, point blank. Charlie wanted to know, what's your knee size? Whatever it is.
Absolutely.
And it just makes it really fun.
Hell yeah. I mean, the Cameo thing, I can't say enough. If you want to have Jackie one-on-one, all he just said, I can't imagine being 13 and being able to do that with, say, George Carlin when he was alive. Having that technology is amazing.
You know what? It's almost like I should charge more because people can't believe what they get for $50.
Hey,
they're like $50. They probably think, oh, he's just going to say hello. And some mornings I just sit there and go on, and my girlfriend Barbara's like, will you shut the fuck up and say goodbye?
Well, one last thing I just want to get to because it's such a great story. Yeah, there's a lot of attention brought to the Ted Williams interview that John did, but I think the funnier story is the Ringo one. Would you mind telling that story and about writing that question?
That is so ridiculous. It was so perfect because that's the oldest joke in the world, the oldest musician's joke. It's not something I wrote. It's something that's been around forever. And I gave it to John. And Ringo, it was Ringo's first tour since he'd been a Beatle. It was Ringo's all-star tour, with like Leslie West,
Joe
and
Walsh,
everybody, Joe Walsh, all these people. And Leslie told me that they would play my CDs on the plane and everybody go nuts. But that was much later. This was the press conference to announce that a Beatle was going to have a world tour. And it was live from someplace in Manhattan, and there were literally 1 billion people listening. Literally 1 billion people listening. And you can imagine all the press in the world is there. So the odds of John getting off a question were absurd. And they picked on John. And John did what he was supposed to do. The setup I gave him, but fucking Ringo gave him the exact right straight line. Like if I was writing what I would like the other guy to say, like Abbott and Costello, he said the precise thing. And John, they say, John Melendez, K-Rock. And John says, Ringo, what'd you do with the money? And Ringo said, what money? He said, the money your mom gave you for singing lessons. 1 billion people, and we were listening live, and I looked at Fred, and we were like, oh, God. Just insulted a fucking Beatle in front of 1 billion people. Oh, it was great.
Oh,
and meanwhile, Ringo didn't flinch. He said, I spent it on fish and chips. And then he just took the next question. What's he give a fuck?
He don't give a fuck. Yeah, I mean, and I bet you he laughed about it later when he really thought about it. Well, hey, that's a great place to end for this interview with us. Like I said, we could talk all afternoon, but Jackie, you got any last comments or anything for our listeners? Any plugs you want to make?
No, I'll just tell you one joke and then I'll hang up. Oh, one thing is I answer all email. Nobody ever believes me, but if somebody has a question or wants to say hello or wants to complain, my email is jokeland@aol.com. jokeland@aol.com. I love hearing from people. I always respond. And my website is jokeland.com. And I tweet a joke every day at 4:20 p.m. International Marijuana Time.
Absolutely.
Filthy jokes every day at 4:20. Old, classic, ridiculous, silly jokes. But I live for them. That is my life. And the Joke Man's coming out. The Joke Man is the name of the documentary, and I'm very thrilled. And I'll tell you one joke, and then I'll say goodbye. And I sent you my book, and I also sent you the second joke book, which I don't even know if you know it exists.
I do. I didn't want to overwhelm our listeners with.
Yeah, there's a whole trove of shit. You'd think I would have made $1, but no.
There's a trove of good stuff, man.
So the guy comes up in front of the divorce judge. And he says, I got to get a divorce. And the judge says, why do you want a divorce? He says, because my wife, all she does is eat pancakes. She's constantly eating pancakes. And the judge says, that's not a big deal. I eat pancakes. And the guy says, not while I'm fucking you. Listen, thanks for doing the interview. I hope it went well. I hope to hear from your listeners, and I'm going to send you some more of those obscure pictures, and let's stay in touch.
Let's stay in touch, and everyone, please grab Jackie's books and give me your questions, because I know we're going to do this one again. There was just too much to cover today, and the documentary is called Joke Man and will be out before you know it. Thank you so much, Jackie.
Coming soon to a theater near you. I never thought I'd get to say that. All right, Johnny, thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Now, that was a ride, wasn't it? Jackie's the coolest, and I just want to thank him again so much for having a chat with us and coming on the Ratio podcast. Please make sure to go to all his links, all his plugs, and make sure to hit up Cameo if you are thus inclined. So that's about all for us this week. We'll have a new episode for you next week. Stay switched on, and we'll talk to you soon.